Good afternoon and welcome to Kennedy Space Center in Florida for the SpaceX CRS-16 pre-launch news conference. I'm Tori McClendon from NASA Communications, and I'm pleased to be joined by Joe Montalbano, NASA Deputy International Space Station Program Manager at Johnson Space Center, Hans Koenigsmann, SpaceX Vice President of Build and Flight Reliability, Kurt Costello, NASA International Space Station Program Chief Scientist at Johnson Space Center, and Clay Flynn, 45th Space Wing Launch Weather Officer with the U.S. Air Force. Thank you all for joining us. We'll begin with opening comments from our presenters, and then we'll be happy to take your questions. For those of you following on social media, you can ask questions using the hashtag AskNASA on Twitter. We'll go ahead and start with you, Joel.
Well, welcome again to the SpaceX 16 pre-launch press briefing. This mission will be the 6th cargo resupply mission, the U.S. cargo resupply mission to the International Space Station, being the 4th SpaceX mission this year, which complements the 2 Cygnus spacecraft, which one still continues to be on board and berthed to the International Space Station. All this today continues the busy year of 2018, comes on the heels of a Soyuz launch earlier this morning. So approximately 6:30 a.m. this morning, we had a launch out of Baikonur, Kazakhstan, with 1 Russian, 1 American, and 1 Canadian on board the Soyuz rocket. The Soyuz rocket launch was fantastic, all nominal. The rocket inserted to an orbital profile, which resulted in a 6-hour docking. So approximately 12:30 Eastern time, the Soyuz docked to the International Space Station about an hour ago or so, 45 minutes to an hour ago. We had the hatches open, and we're back up to 6 crew members on board the International Space Station. So just a great day, and it shows you the robustness of the international partnership we have. You know, working a SpaceX launch here, followed, just like I said, just a few hours, 9 hours ago, having the Soyuz launch in Baikonur, Kazakhstan. This mission will bring up over 5,600 pounds of science, research, crew supplies, maintenance hardware, and a combination of pressurized and unpressurized hardware that will contribute to extending the International Space Station mission of the science and research we do on board. We're working hard to meet the launch time tomorrow. We're targeting a launch time of 13:38 or 1:38 p.m. Eastern time. We are working a small issue with the rodents. We have today, when we were in the process of preparing the rodents to be loaded on board the vehicle, we were looking at some of the food bars that's necessary for the rodents, and they were contaminated with some mold on there. So we have to go ahead and remove those. We're in the process of working a new timeline to see if we can go ahead and make the launch for tomorrow. We're working hard with the SpaceX team. It's going to be tight. But right now we are on target. We're holding the December 4th launch date. We're having some hardware flown in from the Ames Research Center, which will arrive later this evening. That team will come down here, we'll process and get loaded in the vehicle with the goal of making the launch time tomorrow. With the launch time tomorrow, that results in a berthing on December 6th, about 600 Eastern time. And this vehicle will stay on orbit till mid-January. January 13th is what we're looking at today. As far as other activities, I just want to say thank you to the SpaceX team. Thank you to the Kennedy Space Center, the Air Force, all the teams that make these missions possible. Again, like I talked earlier, it's a combination of groups across the globe that work together to make the International Space Station. This year we celebrate 20 years since the first Element launch, and 18 years of crewed on orbit on the International Space Station. And we do it we touched over 100 countries across the world have had some type of research or education or some type of hardware experiment, science experiment on board the International Space Station. And we pool those resources together to be as successful as we are. So with that, I'll hand it back over to you, Tori. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Hans with SpaceX.
Yeah, thank you. And 20 years is really an amazing accomplishment. Congratulations. I'm actually coming from a launch. I'm in the post-launch mood rather than the pre-launch mood. So I got to switch that. We just had a launch on the West Coast, SSOA, pretty much 24 hours before the next one is planned, which is our shortest turnaround time so far, but working very hard to make that possible. The SSRA launch went flawless, basically, and landed a first-stage booster on the drone ship, and deployed a whole bunch of payloads. I just know the SpaceX side of that. Everything was fine on that side, so the deploys are actually continuing as we speak. Going back to CRS-16, we are targeting a 1:38 p.m. launch. If you would slip one day, it would be a 1:16 p.m. launch date, so slightly earlier, 20 minutes, right about, from Slick 40, and it is our 16th cargo mission to the space station. We don't dock, we berth. We berth on the morning of Thursday, December 6th, and we will stay for approximately 5 weeks before we get back and land in the Pacific then. So this is a land landing for the first stage, so we will attempt to land the first stage back here on LC-1. And if successful, this will be our first East Coast landing since Falcon Heavy, and our 33rd landing in total. It's a pretty high number, in my opinion. It's also a little bit of history here. This is about to hit our 8th anniversary of COTS-1, which was the first Dragon around the ISS, and it's also on the day the 5th anniversary of our first geostationary mission from LC-40. So we've come a long way in those couple of years. This is the 5th resupply mission that's using a previously flown Dragon, flight-proven Dragon for that matter, and this particular Dragon supported the CRS-10 mission before, which flew in February 2017. Going forward, all the CRS-1 contracted Dragons will be flight-proven, and we will move to Dragon 2 on the CRS-2 contract. We also had a busy year. This is the 20th launch for SpaceX this year, 11th mission from Slick 40, and we have actually more launches in the past 2 years than in our previous years combined. So lots of launches, and I don't see this getting less over the next couple of years either. So we'll keep going at the high pace here. That part of that is that we gain a lot of experience when we refurbish and recover basically our first stages. We can look at hardware, we can find out what works, we can find out where there are weaknesses potentially, and we can get additional data by flying lots of video cameras and additional data recorders. So refurbishing and reusing stages again, and Dragons, of course, the same way, is a great tool to improve your reliability and make your vehicle overall better, and work on basically make it a 100 times reusable vehicle in the long run. So I think I want to close with thanking first the SpaceX team. Team in Hawthorne building refurbishing the Dragon, the team in Texas testing the booster, and then of course the team in Florida of integrating it and performing the launch. It's a great team and working very hard to make this work. Also, I'd like to thank our customer NASA, partner NASA in this case, and the Air Force and the FAA for their support for the launch. Thank you.
Thank you, Hans. Next up, we have Kurt Costello from NASA.
Thank you. It's great that we've got new crew on orbit today. They're essential for doing the science that we really need to perform on board the ISS. The ISS is an amazing multidisciplinary lab, and SpaceX CRS-16 is bringing 38 new investigations to the ISS. The ISS has multiple missions, both for NASA and as a national laboratory. We're exploring farther into space with some of the payloads that you'll hear about today. We're returning benefits to people here on the Earth, And we're also helping to establish a low Earth orbit economy and a commercial marketplace. The Robotic Refueling Mission, or RRM-3, is bringing new technology to test the capability to robotically refuel spacecraft in space. So we're flying for the first time a cryogenic propellant, and the RRM-3 will be installed exterior to the station and prove out the capability of robots to service and refuel fuel tanks on orbit. This will help us with our goals of someday moving farther out in exploration, either to the moon or to Mars, and the capability of not only having fuel tanks positioned along the way, but also being able to refuel those tanks. Another external investigation on the SpaceX is the Global Ecosystem Dynamics Investigation, also known as JEDI. JEDI is a great Earth observation platform that will be looking at the overall tree height, the canopy of our forests in both the temperate and the tropical regions. Overall, JEDI will use LiDAR to detect the tree heights and the terrain types of various forest ecosystems. This will allow us to build up a map over time that will tell us the total carbon carrying capacity of our forests, not only in the leaf mass and the biomass, but the tree mass as well. Next, we have a number of investigations flying under our National Lab banner that are targeting either development of new medical processes or new materials processes that can help us understand how we can use microgravity, especially the environment on station, to produce goods and products that may have a helpful nature here on Earth. The NALCO Champion microbiology investigation is looking at biofilms, the creation of biofilms in pipes and tubing that has a relevance to our petroleum systems here on Earth. This biofilm can cause corrosion, and we're looking at the difference between biofilms on Earth and in microgravity to understand how we might better prevent or clean these tubes to make sure that our processing of fuels becomes more efficient here on Earth. Lambda Vision is developing a layer-by-layer protein deposition system for artificial retinas. They'll be looking at laying down retinal proteins that can then be implanted to help with both macular degeneration and retinosa pigmentosa. Tympanogen is a company looking at hydrogel formation and drug release. They have technologies here on the ground that release drugs over time. They'll be looking at the structures of these hydrogels as they're mixed on orbit and compared to those on the ground where we have convection involved in the process. They'll be looking at scanning, tunneling microscope pictures to investigate the surface of these gels and see if they get a more standardized, better formation as we see in liquid crystals grown in space. And we also have STARS Bioscience 7. This is a tissue chip platform, one of our first in collaboration with the NIH NCATS program. In this program, CASIS and NIH NCATS are looking at the aging and the process known as immunosenescence in cells. So we're trying to understand better through these tissue chip models how cells age, and if they do so at a faster rate in microgravity, which is something we've been wondering about our own astronauts. So this will help us understand the cellular processes involved in that aging process. And last but not least, we've got a number of student projects flying under the Marvel Guardians of the Galaxy campaign. This campaign challenge, built by CASIS in team with Marvel, has identified 2 teams to participate. In this case, we have a high school student and a college student that have prepared their investigations for on orbit. One looking at the application of dental adhesive on board the space station and whether or not that can be cured properly. properly, and the other looking at aeroponics, growing plants just using a water misting system, something that also hasn't been done on the ISS to date. So we're very excited to have not only our well-developed investigators who've been building investigations for many years finally flying to station, but also these newcomers and our younger generation involved as well.
Thank you. Now we'll go to Clay Flynn from the 45th Space Wing.
Thank you, Tori. Good afternoon. The principal feature that will affect the weather for tomorrow's count is the cold front that we have to the north. If you could bring up the satellite picture. If you'll note, we do have quite a bit of cloud cover up in just to our north as over central Florida and extending into North Florida. The front itself is actually in North Florida, extending down into the Panhandle. We're prefrontal at this time. We're southwesterly flow, very warm flow. Moisture is increasing, so we'd expect to have showers and isolated thunderstorms this afternoon. That threat should begin to wane several hours after the sun sets, with really just a continued isolated or slimmed down isolated shower threat late this evening during the overnight hours. Can't totally rule out an isolated thunderstorm tomorrow morning, but the greatest threat is really this afternoon into the first few hours of the evening. The front itself really doesn't push over us until about sunrise tomorrow morning, and then as we approach the noon hour, the front should be just to our south. With the front to our south, we expect to continue to have residual cloudy conditions over us with some isolated showers. Really, the greater threat is probably thick cloud layer residual clouds behind the front, but certainly can have an isolated shower or two during the count and near T0. So that would bring in a cumulus cloud concern as well as a flight through precipitation concern. Should we be on the path for a 24-hour delay, that front that is in North Florida continues to push to the south. It will be in South Florida, perhaps the Florida Straits the next day with fair conditions expected. The pressure gradient tightens just a little bit, so we'd expect to see the winds picking up a bit for a 24-hour delay, 20 to 25 miles per hour, but otherwise fair conditions. So if you could bring up the forecast charts, I'll go ahead and go through those now. You'll note for tomorrow's count, the gradient will remain support what we have now, about 15 to 20 miles per hour during the count tomorrow and during the window. Our temperature will be 72 degrees Fahrenheit at T0, or that's what it's expected to be. As I mentioned, our principal concern with the frontal boundary just to our south will be residual clouds behind the front, so that would introduce a thick cloud layer concern. I think the bulk of the showers will be to the south, so a slight threat of showers as we approach the window or approach T0 with a slight threat of cumulus clouds. So the principal concern, the greater threat, would be thick cloud layers, residual clouds behind that front. For the 24-hour delay, so I should say a 40% chance of violation, or as some folks like to say, a 60% go chance tomorrow. Should we go to a 24-hour delay, the weather conditions do improve quite a bit. The front, as I mentioned, is down south. We'll have fair skies, just a very few bit of clouds over us at the time. There'll be relatively low clouds, so not really a concern at all. Our gradient does pick up, pressure gradient picks up, so we'll be 20 to 25 miles per hour. Good visibility, about 7 statute miles, and just a 10% chance of violation, and it's relatively slight because we're certainly below the liftoff constraints. So Tuesday, a little marginal. The front should be to the south, and we'll just have to watch how fast that front moves and how quickly we clear, and then Wednesday the weather is quite favorable. And that's all I have, Tori.
Thank you, Clay. At this time, we'll take questions from the audience. And again, for those of you following on social media, you may ask questions using the hashtag AskNASA on Twitter. And for those of you in the room, please remember to raise your hand, wait for the microphone, state your name and affiliation, and to whom you're directing your question. We'll take the first question on the far right. Yes.
Chris Gebhardt with NASA Spaceflight. When you say the timeline is tight to make it with the mouse food issue, do you mean, how tight do you mean? Like, if it's a car analogy, like, is it the GPS telling you you're going to get there right at the time you want to get there, or is there still some leeway in there?
So we've been working with our SpaceX colleagues to change. You have a normal loading time when you do the late load, and we're going to be past that. And so as far as we're working with the teams now is how much further can we go. And so right now I believe the rodents were going to be loaded, Kurt, around midnight or 1 a.m. or so. So maybe, with the team arriving in Orlando around 9 p.m., it'll probably push that an hour or so, hour and a half or so. Now, if there's delays because of the weather that you just heard, and we can't make the timeline, then we'll all get together and we'll stand down and we'll go look for the 90% go day.
And for Hans, the stand down for the SSOA flight for stage 2 inspections, was that a common thing with this rocket? Did you have to do the same inspections on this stage 2, or was it unique to that vehicle on the West Coast?
So we just verified that we don't have to do this on this side, that it's unique to Vandenberg and launch equipment there. So no.
Okay. I also just want to quickly mention that we have a phone bridge available for media who wish to call in. We'll take our next question from Ken Thornsley.
Hi, thank you. For Hans and Joel, first, congratulations to both of you on great launches. And OSIRIS-REx, too, just arrived. So, spectacular day for science. My question for you two is, I wonder if you could clarify a little bit, give us an update on DM1 launching. Apparently, Administrator Bridenstine made some comments last week that January 7th might not be the date. So I wonder if you could clarify that and Hans, tell us where it is in the processing. Thanks.
Okay, good question. We have all the parts on Demo 1 here at the Cape at this point in time. We're going through final integration. We're going through final tests. We're going through a lot of additional analysis, verification on requirements, and the whole company focus is certainly, after CRS-16 back on Demo 1. What I could see is a couple of days because of traffic. For example, CRS-16 is actually at the same time on the station, so there's lots of traffic, lots of crew time requirements. So we need to sort that out. But our target is at this point in time mid-January, and pushing as hard and diligent as we can for this particular launch. So at the end of the day, I want to really point out. It's way more important for us to get Dragon 2 safely up there and make sure that the mission is successful than anything else in terms of schedule and timeline.
So there's no issues with parachute testing and things like that?
No, we're working through issues, obviously. Every launch has things that we work through to make sure they work fine. On Demo 1 has 4 parachutes actually. That's a change from Dragon 1 to Dragon 2. So those parachutes have more redundancy than on Dragon 1, and they're also reinforced on Demo 1. So I'm pretty sure it's going to be successful.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, we'll go to the phone. We have Stephen Clark from Spaceflight Now.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I have a couple of questions, I think, for Hans. First of all, can you update us on SpaceX's move into one of the firing rooms at the Kennedy Launch Control Center? I know that's either been activated or it's close to being activated. Can you talk about when that was used or when it's going to be used? Will it be used tomorrow? And what's the plan going forward with your Launch and Landing Control Center down by the South Gate? And secondly, for Hans, you had 2 launches, little more than 24 hours now, from 2 different coasts. I'm curious. I know you have redundant launch teams on each coast, but what's the fastest, conceivably, at the present time, you could turn around and launch from different pads with the current layout of the launch teams? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. First to the first question, the launch control, formerly known as Firing Room 4, has been used on, I think, our last mission here from the Cape. It was very successful. I personally enjoy the place. It's a great view of the pad when you launch from 39. We launched from 40 here, and we are not quite ready to use it, so we're not going to use it this time. Going forward, obviously, we will use launch control, formerly known as Firing Room 4, more and more, obviously. It's a great place, also closer to this room. So not for this time, but going forward, yes. And the second question was, sorry. What's the second question?
Stephen, would you mind repeating your question?
Launching from both coasts.
Oh, launching from both coasts, exactly. Okay, good. Thank you. So this 24 hours is approximately my comfort zone actually for reviewing data and going through stuff. We can push this a little bit closer. It depends a little bit on what time of day this is. So in other words, if you do have a launch really early in the morning and then another one late at night, you might go as low to as 13, 14 hours. But obviously you have to make sure that nothing on the just flown booster has an effect on the next booster. So 24 hours is enough time to review the data. Could be pushed a little bit more, but there's obviously a time when it gets too tight.
Okay, next on the phone we have Irene Klotz from Aviation Week. Okay, we'll go ahead and take questions from the audience. All right. Please, go ahead.
Chris Gebhardt with NASA Spaceflight again. Hans, because you mentioned the timelines for this mission coming back in mid-January, can this Cargo Dragon be up there on station or free flying in orbit when the DM-1 Crew vehicle launches? Is SpaceX capable of having two Dragons on orbit at the same time?
Good question. Yeah, it's one of those. In principle, yes, but it's so. If when Dragon is on the station, it's relatively quiet in the control room, and we could run another mission. We've done this actually many times, that we have other missions at the same time, and that's something that we routinely do. If both are free flying, that's a little bit more effort, and we gotta do that later. And in general, we must be able to handle more than one Dragon on the station. So this is not a technical problem. This is more a problem of focusing on Demo 1 and making sure that Demo 1 is really ready to go and not being distracted by any other missions in parallel. So I think there's a benefit if you can separate them. If you have to, then we can fly both at the same time, but the overhead is obviously there.
Hi, Emery Kelly with Florida Today. Joel, I know this is in the weeds. Can we get an exact launch time for tomorrow down to the second? And also, when it comes to the rodents, can you go into a little bit more details about that food? If the rodents aren't ready, does that impact other experiments flying? Is this food they're going to consume on the station? So if they get new food, could that go bad 2 weeks from now, or what's the deal there?
So basically, the launch time moves about 22 minutes earlier every day. So Hans said 1:16. We'll go get you the second. I don't have that with me today. Do you have this?
I have it, yeah, because it's 51 seconds for the. So it's 1:38:51 for the first day, and then the backup is. The backup might have moved. I have 1:16:18, but it might have moved 2 or 3 seconds.
As far as the rodents and the food, so. What we're doing now is we're assuming that all the food is suspect, not only the food that was going to be loaded today, but the food we already had loaded. So we're going to replace all that food. One of the rodents is one of our primary mission objectives. It's important enough for us that if we're not ready to go with the rodents, we'll go ahead and delay a day. And so from that, it is an impact of a day if we go down that path. But like I said, the SpaceX team has given up some margin in their timeline. They're working with us. We're doing things a little quicker, and we're still going to try and make tomorrow's launch time.
Okay. Next, we'll go back to the phone line for Irene Klotz with Aviation Week.
Hi, can you hear me this time?
We can hear you.
Great, thank you. I have a few questions. The first for Joel is what is the current plan on the reflight of the Soyuz MS-10? When would Nick Hague and Alexei Ovechkin fly?
So today it was announced after the Soyuz docking that we'll refly Nick and Alexei along with Christina Cook in March 1st of 2019.
Okay, thanks very much. Appreciate that. And for Hans, 2 questions. The first is, how far off was Mr. Stephen from payload fairing half splashdown? And the other question for you is SpaceX still planning on back-to-back flights within 24 hours of the same Block 5 next year?
Yeah, thank you, Irene. So I don't know how much we missed it by on this particular flight this morning, or this afternoon rather. But I want to. This is actually an older version of the fairing. There's an upgrade that we had, and that upgrade will make it easier for Mr. Stephen to find the fairing. But I can't answer your question because I was just running out before I got that. However, I do know that we had some really awesome footage of Mr. Stephen in the webcast, so it's definitely worth taking a look at that. And the other question, what was that again? Sorry, I can only do one question at a time, I guess.
Okay, about the Block 5 reflights within 24 hours next year.
Yeah,
if that's still looking like it's something you might attempt to do.
Correct. That's still on the bucket list. Depends a little bit on how the missions work out. I hope we can do this next year, in 2019 rather. But if it might slip a little bit. It's certainly something that we do want to try as soon as we get a chance. And it depends on basically which missions are ready to do this.
Thank you.
John McGill with Line.Cable. This question is for Joe. How many spacecraft are berthed at the space station right now, and what is the record number?
So we have a Cygnus spacecraft is berthed with the recent launch of the Antares rocket. We have 2 Progresses and 2 Soyuz attached right now. And so that's the complement of visiting vehicles. And then with the SpaceX-16, that'll be 2 berth vehicles. As far as what's the record, this is probably, I'll have to go back and look at my history, but I think 6 is the record, where we're at today.
Next, we'll go back to Ken Thornsley, front row. Ken, go ahead and raise your hand again.
Hi, Ken Kramer for Hunts. Going back to the 24-hour recycle, what I've noticed when you come back into Cape Canaveral, you've had some difficulty, it seems like, with the leg retraction. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that. They have been retracted against the side, and then they were let down flush, and then they were all dissected. I thought your goal was to retract them and bring them and not have to disassemble it and put them back on. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that. And for Kurt, can you talk a little bit more about this food for the mice? I'm just curious how it could get contaminated. Did it get moldy? Was it an old lot, or what? How did it fit through the cracks? Thanks.
Yeah, on the legs, I don't have the details why we take them off right now, if what you say, but I can confirm folding them up and basically just like in the launch configuration, that is the ultimate goal. Otherwise, you lose too much time, obviously. So yeah, that's the goal. I'm not sure what the current processor problem is. Sorry.
And your question as far as the food bars are concerned, they're shipped in sterile packaging, but the food bars have to be manipulated to put on a plate to go inside the mouse habitat. It's suspect that when that happened, they were exposed and mold started to grow on them. This is something we're still looking into, though, and there'll be an investigation as to how they got contaminated.
But if they were exposed, how would that explain the bars you want to replace on the ISS itself that are already there? If I understood you right. Or maybe you mentioned that, actually.
Yeah, I think what Joel was referring to is we already pre-pack the food, and so that food is already on the SpaceX. That food that is now suspect will just be returned and not used.
So that was packed. So we do our packing with an early pack, and then we have our late packing, which we were going to do today. So the majority of the food bars, that was all loaded early. But what we're doing is we're assuming that those are suspect, and so we're planning accordingly, and we'll go ahead and just fly all new food bars, and we'll do the extra loading tonight when we have all the new hardware.
We'll take a couple more questions before we wrap up. First, we'll go to social media.
Hi, I've got 2 questions that came in for Hans on Twitter. The first one is, you mentioned an upgraded fairing earlier. Do you mean a different upgrade from the one that was used for the first time in February on the PAS mission?
I think it is the same upgrade. This is, I could have said it the other way around, that we used an older version instead of that, but I think that is the upgrade. It's mostly related to recovery, nothing on the fairing itself. And thank you for waiting between the 2 questions.
Of course. And the second question would be, why does Dragon require 2 days to rendezvous with the ISS?
It's a good question.
So it's a phase angle, and so you have to look at the angle at the launch time where space station is with respect to where the orbit of the Dragon is inserted. And what happens is you have to catch up to the International Space Station. And so you can pick days where you can do a 2-day rendezvous, 4-day rendezvous, or like you saw this morning, the Soyuz, where you did a 4-orbit or 6-hour rendezvous. It depends on the launch day you pick, and that drives the phase angle, which results in when docking occurs.
Thank you.
Hi, Matt Haskell with the Aerospace Geek. My question is for Hans. With regards to the fairings, when they don't land in the net and they land on the saltwater softly, as was referred to today's recovery, what is the capability of reusing those? Is it possible to refly those, or is the saltwater damage too much?
We're actually looking into this. It depends. We are basically so close now to the place where they go into the water. It's something we can now look closer, and I'm not sure what's going to happen with that, but that is certainly a possibility. Yeah.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to the phone. We have Jim Siegel with Spaceflight Insider. Jim?
Thank you. I'm curious about what cargo is coming back on CRS-16 in mid-January or so. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So I'll start out, and then I'll let Kurt add. I mean, generally we have where we're bringing back 20 live rodents. And so that'll be one thing we're bringing back. We'll continue to bring back some of the science that we have frozen on board. And so, as you can imagine, with the science tests, when we do experiments on board, we go ahead and freeze them in our minus 80 degrees freezer, and that starts a certain lifetime clock. So we'll go ahead and bring some of those science samples home. I'm sure we'll have some hardware that we'll bring home, things that failed on orbit that we want to go ahead and take a look at. I can go get you a list, Jim, and we can get that sent to you, but those are probably the highlights. And I don't know, Kurt, any big things that I missed?
Not really. We've got a number of samples coming back, probably in the range of 50 or so experiments that will be returning samples, along with of course, our human research samples. Some of those will be coming down on the Dragon as well. So we're looking forward to getting all that science back. The timeline is tight for our rodent research operations, and we expect again to have 20 of those animals returned live with the SpaceX 16.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for joining us. That's all the time that we have for today. NASA TV coverage for tomorrow's launch will begin at 1 p.m. Eastern. You can also follow the SpaceX CRS-16 mission activities on Twitter using @NASA and @SpaceX, and on the web at www.nasa.gov/SpaceX. Thank you.